Welcome to this week's CTO Studio. We talk to Meetesh Karia from Austin. He's in the studio with us, and we talk through diversity in hiring, inclusion, age bias, gender bias, combating that. And we also talk about space, where no one can hear you scream.
I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I'm your host, Etienne de Bruin. The CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products with incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Meetesh Karia.
You got it.
Welcome to the CTO Studio.
Thanks for having me here.
You just fresh off the plane.
In from Austin, and I can drink the water here now. So
because you guys are boiling water.
We're boiling water in Austin right now.
That is, that's a thing.
It is. I didn't think I would have to do that outside of India, but
do you boil and then you rest it to cool down?
We usually boil about 6 or 7 gallons every morning, and then by evening it's...
Holy moly, you guys are actually doing this.
Oh, yeah.
What about just buying water?
It's more expensive, and there's a mad rush on it. So we're like, we have the ability to boil it, and so we just do that.
That's one thing I saw in America after 9/11 was a rush on, I think there was like the anthrax scare.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a rush on duct tape.
Oh, yeah. And I tell you, anything comes up and there's a massive rush in store.
And that's when you realize how fragile the supply chain is.
Absolutely. It's made for the average case, not for the
Absolutely.
Not for the
so
peaks.
if there's a heat wave, boom, all the ACs are gone.
Yeah, we saw that. I grew up in Florida, and we saw that a lot with hurricanes. Every time a hurricane came through, nothing on the shelves.
Do you think we should be prepared for empty grocery stores? Do you guys, for instance, have a food supply, like a survival pack food supply?
Not really. You can kind of say Costco is that. When our kids got old enough that they started eating us out of house and home, we just go buy, granola bars and fig bars in bulk. And so that's, that kind of stuff will never go bad, right?
So one thing I remember about your story as I was prepping for this was I begged my superior right when I got my first job to give me the root password so that I can quickly install something. I think I was trying to install the Usenet news server or a IRC client or something. And for weeks he was like, I'm not giving it to you, I'm not giving it to you. I'm not giving it to you. And eventually, it was like a Friday afternoon, I said, dude, just, please. And I gave him the benefits of what it could mean if I install this thing. And when soon as I sudo to root, I decided to change the root password.
Good idea.
And I thought I would temporarily change it so that I didn't have to ask him, because I was anticipating a couple switches, and I must have done something, because seconds after I changed it, I forgot it, all the emotions I felt going back to him saying, you were right. I completely did what you thought was going to happen.
Yep.
And I took it even further. I locked you out of the system because I cannot tell you what the password
is. Sounds like a classic mistake.
Oh, my goodness. Do you have any similar stories?
I do, actually. So my first job out of college, I was put in charge of things that no 21-year-old should have been put in charge of. Some of that involved pricing all of the cars for a site called carorder.com. And so here I am, 6 months out of college. I have a couple little things related here where, I had to enter a ton of data of, okay, what are the, MSRP, list prices for these cars? And I was like, I'll get a temp to go do this. I'd never managed anyone in my life. I didn't know how to make sure that that she was doing the job correctly. And so she had transposed the prices for a Cavalier and a Camaro. Very different in price.
Now, hang on. So what's the difference? I don't know.
So a Cavalier at the time, you're probably low end, probably talking like, $18,000, maybe $20,000. Camaro, you're talking in the, $50,000, $60,000, right? And so transposes those prices, and I was applying these dynamic pricing algorithms, but based off the list prices. And so we went out into production, and we're offering to sell a Camaro for the price of a Cavalier. And then all of a sudden we get, people like, oh man, everyone's hitting the site. Everyone, we're getting all these orders. What's going on? And we realized that we, had just accepted, and at that time a lot of orders was 4, right? I mean, who bought a car on the internet? We just sold 4 Camaros for about 30 to 40K loss on each of them. So that was a pretty quick sobering lesson on.
And what happened to you because of that?
Nothing. They just a little bit of lesson. Thankfully, because everyone else at the company was only like 8 months out of college.
Did they revert? Did they admit that there was a mistake and it didn't go through?
They did. They actually went and thankfully the legalese covered them, and there were some unhappy customers. But when there were only 4 of them, it wasn't but I soon learned it wasn't the end of the world. But along those same lines, learned a lot of lessons at this this place. I had access to our pricing model, and that pricing model, whenever you made changes, would affect the prices directly on the site. And I made a change to the pricing model that I thought was correct, ended up not being correct, and set the prices to all the cars to -$1 on the site. I made that change at, 5:30 p.m. on an evening, and then proceeded to go, and I, had a practice for sports, and so I was away from phone, anything for the next 3 hours, only to come back and have like 7 voicemails of people trying to revert it and figuring out that the change was not revertible, and they had to go reconstruct the pricing model from scratch.
Goodness.
And so I learned pretty quickly.
Wow. So for 3 hours, all the cars were for sale for -$1.
Correct.
That is.
So I learned very quickly the importance of a staging environment.
As a CTO, how do you deal with your employees when they make mistakes like that?
To be quite honest, that's, both of those things I couldn't have learned faster if someone had told me, right? I'm making those mistakes were probably some of the best things for me. And so one of the things that I tell my team, and I really want to do, is I want to create a culture where people aren't afraid of failure. They should be able to fail within reason. And our jobs as leaders are to create the bounds so that they don't fail spectacularly and that they can learn from it. And so what I tell them is that no one gets punished for making an honest mistake. If it's out of negligence or if you keep making the same mistake, then we're going to talk. But no one is punished for making an honest mistake.
And what I know about you personally is you can't stand people who make the same mistake.
I can't. You're right. You're very right.
Am I betraying our confidence?
No, we're not. I have a lot of patience. Actually, I'm a really patient person. But one thing that gets to me is people doing the same thing repeatedly over and over again.
A way that I navigate my way through that is to blame the process and not the person. And I try and tell myself, okay, if there was a screw up and and there was a process that they followed, then the screw up is an indication and an opportunity for the process to be optimized and clarified and fixed. It helps me to not, as a leader, take their failure personally and to not see the person, but to say, well, there's this document that needs fixing. Obviously, in a dev environment, you can't always. Everything is not processized. Right. I mean, for instance, if there is a process that says never update the pricing models before you go home, and someone does that, to me that is, well, either the process isn't clear that it's every weekday, or and then you got to ask yourself, is it negligence or did they willfully ignore the process?
Yeah, and that was an interesting thing. I learned early on about how I operate versus how other people operate. Where this was back probably, I'd say 2005, 2006, and we're deploying things, and there's a set of maybe 6 steps to follow to deploy. And I would just, anytime I'd deploy, go through all the steps and everything would be fine. And without fail, whenever anyone else deployed, they would miss a step. Not always the same step. It would always miss a step. And it irked me because I was like, they're written right there. All 6 of them. There's not a ton of them. And then, what that finally led me to realize is that my attention to detail and what I think about is not what everybody else thinks about. And that the problem wasn't the lack of process. The problem was that this is something that needed to be automated. So someone didn't have the opportunity to fail.
Wow, that is a different spin on it. Because you could have a process document that is pristine, but just not executable.
Correct.
Because it just shouldn't be done.
Right. And so that was actually when I finally was like, okay, it was another insight into, hey, I need to think about this stuff not just for what works for me, because I think differently than other people, just like they think differently than others. But
something that I love and I've recently discovered is the process of collaborating on SOPs or processes, so that everyone, when they leave the room, not only voiced how they think something should be done, but they've also had the opportunity to collaborate on optimizing it. And then when they leave the room, they feel a sense of ownership on it. And I think a lot of times it's when we tell people how to do things, that we aren't transferring ownership.
Right. We're not getting their buy-in because they're being told do it this way, not, how would you, here are the constraints, how would you solve it? And it's a fine line, right? Because you can't leave it completely open-ended for a committee-based decision. But you need their input. You want their input because you're actually probably going to end up with a better result because they see things that you don't.
Very true. So you have children.
Do.
You have?
2.
And I have 3. And what I'm thinking about now is there room for disciplining employees?
It's a funny thing. So I was talking to a buddy of mine who also has kids. I think he has 4 now. And this was a few years ago. And we both came to the same conclusion that becoming parents made us better leaders. And a big part of that was needing to listen, right? Truly needing to listen. And then also on the discipline front, learning that kids don't always do what you tell them to do or want them to do, and sometimes they have to learn for themselves. But so excuse me, along those lines of discipline, my wife is a teacher, and she's strongly in favor of positive reinforcement as opposed to kind of negative punishment. And so it's interesting that actually filters into discipline and leading teams. I constantly catch myself thinking, rather than, hey, you're in trouble for doing this, how can I set up a system where people are rewarded for doing the right things as opposed to punished for doing the wrong things?
Yeah, it's a tough one. The being composed and always sort of emotionally present to be able to think that way.
Yeah, or I can start taking away their iPhones if
it's incredibly effective.
Yeah.
If you want to see my children weep, it's at the hint that there may be a consequence of those things being taken away.
Oh, that works really well. Though I actually, it's kudos to my older son. I threatened that he was complaining about wearing pants on the first cold day. And I said, you're not leaving the house without wearing pants. And he said, well, I'm not going to school then. And I said, fine, then you're going to fail the project that's due today that you've worked 2 weeks on. And he looked at me with almost tears in his eyes and said, fine, I'll wear pants. But that sense of responsibility, both like I felt bad using it, but I felt so proud.
But he came to that. You basically gave him an unsolvable problem.
Yes.
Which he solved. Just on that very quickly, my youngest daughter, she's going through a growth spurt, and this growth spurt seems to involve lying. And I've realized that in my paradigm, she is not telling the truth, and therefore she's lying. In other words, I didn't do that to my brother, or my son says that she did something, and then she's like flatly denies it. in her paradigm, she's not telling the truth, but she's playing.
She's manipulating.
She's for her, it's like, I don't understand what is lying and truth. So what's the big deal if I say, no, it didn't happen? Ha ha ha. Like, it didn't happen. And I had to back out of my, oh geez, I have a real problem. I have a lying toddler, versus saying, you know what, I need to coach her through that. This game that she's playing doesn't have a good outcome, but that's something that she's going to have to figure out, because at some point she might see that as a way to like never get out of it and just be like a part of her. Well, if I want to wish something away, I just lie about it.
And you know, I feel like that kind of goes back to letting people fail a little bit and setting the right bounds. Is that how do we, you know, as parents, as leaders, allow people to learn, and you know that lying is not good and why it's not good, but not do it in such a case where they're going to get, you know, fail a class because they lied to their teacher, or get kicked out of school because they lied about something, or, you know, something like that. And it's a tough, tricky line to walk.
So you're the CTO of The Zebra.
Indeed.
The Zebra.
The Zebra.
What do you say, The Zebra?
I say The Zebra.
And are you like thezebra.com or just The Zebra?
Thezebra.com.
Okay.
But we go by both.
Okay, and just briefly, what do you guys do? Who do you serve? And how do you do that?
Absolutely. Probably the quickest comparison is Kayak for insurance. And right now we started in the auto insurance vertical, and we're a search engine to help connect consumers that are looking for auto insurance with insurance carriers. There surprisingly isn't, you know, or it hasn't been a real player in the space. Travel. You know, we had Kayak, we had Orbitz, we had Expedia, all these different players come into being, you know, now 15 years ago. Other parts of fintech with lending and credit cards have all been kind of addressed, but, you know, insurance hadn't been. It was a largely, you know, non-price transparent, lead gen, spam-filled space. And so what we're trying to do is cut through that and provide value to consumers by educating them in much the ways like TurboTax or Credit Karma did about complicated subjects, and then also connecting them with the carriers that are the best for them without them having to go and call, you know, 4 or 5 different places, enter all their information multiple times. And then, you know, those educated consumers are then more valuable to the carriers because they're the right match for those carriers. And then they are, you know, they retain those consumers longer and they're happier.
And so are you making deals with carriers?
The carriers are our customers are actually the carriers.
Okay, and then so they make they provide you with APIs for extracting their data and all that.
There's a few different ways. It depends on the carrier, the state, and the combination. Some of them now have adopted APIs. They're so far behind technically. Some of them have adopted APIs, and we can integrate with them. In other places, we've had to go through other means to either get access to exact rates or get access to estimates. There are every insurance carrier is required to file some portion of their rate structure with the Department of Insurance of the state. But there are tons of loopholes, and they, you know, obviously for competitive reasons are not very interested in sharing all of their models. And so you can kind of reverse engineer some of that, but not all of it.
So if just from sort of a technical problem that you're solving, are you telling the carrier all the criteria and they spit numbers back, or are you getting generic numbers and then you apply rules to the sort of normalized data?
It's the former. So
Okay.
we're collecting the data and then calling out to a number of different places and saying, okay, you know, for this data, what is the rate?
And so if one carrier supports one dimension and another one doesn't, you just know what not to submit.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so that's actually kind of the key thing is like what's important and what influences the rate, and how do we, you know, the carriers want a ton of data. How do we simplify the process and make it such that we don't need to collect as much, but still provide as accurate a rate as possible? And so then we pass whatever information we have and use that. And then the carriers will also provide multiple options too. You know, sometimes the coverage that the consumer wanted doesn't match exactly, so they provide different responses. Sometimes they say different payment plans, et cetera.
Now, if you think about, so if I think about the sales cycle, do carriers want to be lumped with other carriers like you're doing?
So originally, no, right? They looked at what happened in the UK, where essentially the market got hyper commoditized, and people didn't know the insurance carriers; they knew the comparison sites. And the insurance carriers here, who are firmly entrenched, had tons of money, and had been around forever, were extremely averse to that. They were like, "Well, no, we don't want to do that." And so that's all. That's why they resisted the move to technology, why they resisted the price transparency, and and why they've been so far behind for so long. And so they called it spreadsheeting. They didn't want to become a commodity, and they've spent a ton of money on their brands to prevent that. And so that's what our job is. Then is to say, how do we represent the carrier as more than a commodity, right? What is the thing that they bring beyond just the price? And then to the consumer, price is probably the biggest factor for everybody, but especially for different segments of the market, there's a little bit of price flexibility. Maybe for some people, they value that their claims get paid instantly. Maybe for some people, they value that that they have the best towing service that they connect with, or that they have the best customer service, right? And so that's a matter of connecting them with someone that they will get the best service for. And then there are parts of the market that, frankly, whatever's the cheapest, it doesn't matter, right?
And so if let's say I have 3 vehicles, do I give you my 3 vehicle data and then the driver data, and then you ping the carriers?
We ping the carriers and connect with other places where we have data, given the information that we have, including the vehicles, the driver data, information on incidents or violations, so tickets or accidents or claims.
And so those come from a different database, I'm assuming.
Those we have to get from the consumer. And so that's actually probably one of our biggest struggles with accurate rates is actually not the integrations. It's about the quality of data we get from consumers. Partly because, on one hand, people, even the best intending people don't remember all of it, right? You don't really always want to remember your tickets or violations. You don't remember if they were 3 years ago or 4 years ago. You just remember at some time you had that. And then there are people that, frankly, are trying to not have them show up. And what they don't realize is that at some point in the process, it's going to show up because the carrier is going to pull a report from the motor vehicle registry.
What is your opinion on the pay per mile thing that's happening now?
I think it's an extremely intriguing model, and one that we're actually starting to try to figure out how best to work with and embrace. Because I look at myself. I live about 2.5 miles from the office that I go into. I drive my kids around, but I probably drive 5,000 miles a year, and that's well below the nation average or the national average. And so for someone like me, by the mile insurance would actually probably be pretty beneficial because I'm not on the road as much.
Is there a sort of a catch to it that none of us are aware of? Or
I think part of it is that we're yet to see how it plays out, right? It's all pretty new. The telematics that we're collecting, right? The carriers are, using it for, what they say is their best intentions to provide you with the best rates, but we don't see what's going into the risk models, and they could be punishing people, but it's almost hyper capitalistic in some ways. So I guess we'll see whether or not it needs to be regulated at some point, and if so, then that would it's obviously because of some downside.
Yeah, and so do you the Zebra is striking deals then sort of commission based with these carriers, or?
It depends on the carrier, because the carriers have kind of 3 primary distribution models. For the independent agents, the ones that worked with your mom and pop brick and mortars, typically, we're actually a licensed insurance agent or broker and appointed. And so that there are commission or brokerage, fees and things that we collect from them. For the other ones, there's a captive distribution model, which is like your State Farms in all states, where they have agents, but Allstate agents are only Allstate agents. State Farm so they don't want to disintermediate and disrupt their distribution chain. So that a lot of those are referral fees that we pay, or we get paid. And the same is with the direct to consumer model. They don't have an agent base, so they pay for referrals.
And so the as far as competition in the space, I'm assuming a lot of these service aggregation services are sort of search services.
Yeah.
Whether it's healthcare or whether it's insurance or whether it's, you guys are focused on auto insurance, right?
Auto right now, and hopefully soon other lines of
Yeah.
property and casualty insurance.
Are you having to deal with spreadsheets? Incoming
Spreadsheet, as in
like a carrier sends you spreadsheets.
Oh no, thankfully not. But no, the competitive nature is really interesting because the entire industry, because the carriers weren't embracing technology, it had been very much a lead gen industry that provided very little value to the consumer. It became very spammy.
Yeah,
it was almost pure arbitrage.
Yeah, you basically scrape, put a landing page down, and you just take the
generate leads.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was another acquisition source, but it was a relatively low conversion, low value acquisition source. It just had such high volume.
So let's switch a little bit to the way I got to know you, which was you gave a talk on diversity in hiring, and your talk shone the spotlight not only on how you hire but also Andela as a service. So can you talk to me a little bit about sort of the makeup of your team and then how you hire and why that composition exists?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And the team, we've grown a tremendous amount since September. We were I guess at that point mid-20s on the a number of people on the team, and now we're a little bit over 50, so we've more than doubled in the last year. But the composition of the team is that I believe right now I have about 38, 39 in Austin and 12 in Africa with Andela. But amongst those, that team itself, I just pulled some of these numbers there. We have about 20% is female, which is lower than we'd like, but something we're working on. But something we're proud of is 53% is non-white male. And the other part to the makeup of the team is that a full 50% of the team is non-traditionally educated. So it didn't come from it didn't have a STEM degree.
How many? What percentage?
50.
And are they in junior roles?
No, they're all over. We have, for example, one of my most senior engineers was a chemistry major. So when I say STEM roles, I'm looking at computer science, math, engineering, and physics. But he, one of the most senior ones was a chemistry major. But then I have another one who's a photographer. I have another one who's a meteorologist.
Wow. I mean, I find career changes to be just the most fascinating problem solvers.
It's an interesting thing because one of the things that you need, especially in an early stage business, is a grit, like this desire and this level of ownership, and to go through and say, hey, I'm going to go take this leap. I'm going to take this massive risk, but I'm going to go do it. It takes a lot of guts, right? And it takes a lot of drive. It takes a lot of self-motivation. And in general, that speaks, volumes around people who not only take that, but then are willing to put in the time and effort to be really good at it. That speaks volumes about those people.
And that's one of the reasons why I love code school people so much, is because, sometimes, especially like the 30-year-olds or the 40-somethings, I mean, these are bold moves to embrace a brand new craft.
And when we look at it, if we were to compare hiring someone right out of college with a CS degree versus someone who, maybe in their mid-20s decided to change careers, we're either going to have someone that's strong, potentially strong technically, but we have to teach them how to work, how to be part of a team, how to show up to meetings on time, how to respond to emails, or you have someone who's mature, proven themselves as someone who knows how to work, who knows how to drive and how to get things done, and you're teaching them technology. And if they've already learned a number of other subjects, this is kind of like my view on programming languages. There are very few problems for where you need an expert in that programming language, and where learning it isn't okay. Now, we do need we need to balance that with some of the, people who have some strong background in computer science and theory. We just don't need that for everybody on the team.
Yeah, I think the having algorithms in your back pocket is crucial, especially I think at your size. But having people not be focused on, well, I'm not going to hire this person because they're JavaScript and not PHP. I'm like, well, those days are over, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
So can you tell me a little bit about, so you said what percentage is non-white male?
53%, so just over 50%.
And does that include the Andela number?
That includes the Andela number.
And so why is that important to you? Why is that an important stat?
So it's important to me because I don't really look at diversity as only a gender or race. I also look at it as age. We have a team, about 50 people. The age range is from 22 to 55, with the average age being almost 33 or 34 on the team, right? Which for a startup and in tech is not normal, right? It tends to skew younger, it tends to overall. But that age brings experience. It brings different experiences from different places that is all, helpful. But so it's not just race, it's not just gender, it's viewpoint, what they grew up with, what kind of education they came with. It can be sexual orientation and identity because they come with different perspectives of problems they've dealt with and how they've solved them. There's a number of different things that go into diversity for me. And so that's why, I think it is important to ensure that we have a more equitable gender balance and that we have a more equitable race balance. But overall, I'm also looking at, do we have a well-balanced team from all different sides?
And that balance manifests itself how?
It manifests itself in terms of when we're solving problems, right? If you look at it, people coming from one background have learned how to solve problems in one way. And, this is a slightly tangential but related, which is one of the reasons that I went to the Zebra is that it was me stepping out of the network of people I already knew. And I wanted to take that network and use it, but I wanted to work with people that didn't come up in that network and thought differently because I wanted to help, I wanted their input and I wanted to solve problems differently and not just be surrounded by everyone who had similar experiences and solved problems the same way. Because my belief in that is that would lead to better solutions. And I would be challenged to put myself in that, other shoes and say, wait, I've always thought about it from this standpoint, but what if they're, right?
Yeah, and I think, so have you had moments where you're in your meeting and you think, oh my goodness, this is that in action? Like that person just went up to the whiteboard and said something or combined some ideas in ways that I would never, ever have imagined.
Yeah, I mean, we'll look at it even as simply as, we have a woman who's we brought on as a lead QA, is now kind of built up our QA environment. She is not from the States originally. She's from Belarus. And she came from much more, I guess, bureaucratic or autocratic company cultures. And so she was used to not only being told exactly what to do, but then her telling her team exactly what to do. And so we had to back off of that a little bit, but then it got to us thinking of like how much of, the way we manage people today is like, we should think about it, right? Should we question some of it? How prescriptive should we be? Should we be, what's the right balance? Because we want and need the input of people, but we also need to get things done, right? And so that was, I guess, just one example of where it caused us to question and, evaluate how we managed the team. Because of that. So
I have a friend who's from Malaysia, and we did a few projects together, and I was really shocked at how culturally we were just passing each other by. Like, he would do something that was so left field and antagonized the team or the situation so much that it would almost be like, well, this guy needs to be fired. I mean, you know, and then vice versa. Like I would ask him to do something which I would think is completely like normal, and then he would take offense to me asking him to do something outside of his job description and beyond the you know, the employer-employee relationship. I did realize that there was a real problem here, which was a cultural disconnect, where my paradigm, something could be completely acceptable, whereas in his, it was unthinkable. At what point does one say, especially since you have a multicultural team, A, have you faced this where you've said, oh, this is a cultural lost in translation moment? And then B, how do you deal with it, and how do you think companies should deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one. And I actually, the first thing that comes to mind is in some ways the difference between our team in Africa, via Andela, and, you know, a different team that we had been working with in India previously. And I've worked with many teams, you know, from all over the world. And I'm, you know, very well versed in Indian culture. And one of the things is that no one wants to say no, or they don't want to disappoint. But, you know, in a field where I value, or where we need transparency and predictability, I care more that someone tells me, is this on track or not, and raises red flags, than, you know, whether or not they're just going to put their head down and get it done, right? I want to know along the way.
Say yes now and figure out how to do it over the weekend.
Right. And so we, you know, I want to understand what the risk is and do all that. But so we, you know, over the course of working with teams in India, you know, all the way back to 2004, that was one consistent trait that we had, is that you weren't really sure if someone said they were going to get it done, if they were really going to get it done, right? Because there's this cultural notion of like not wanting to disappoint, not, you know, wanting to say no. And so, you know, we learned to work with it, but it took a lot of, you know, cognitive effort, and you had to train new managers and people who hadn't do it. You had to spend a lot of extra time on that. And so that's one of the reasons why when we started working with the team at Andela, and they were actually far closer in culture, you know, that cultural aspect to us, you know, in the US, that we didn't have to go spend all that time training them. That once we got that, we found that, you know, that other team, we decided we were actually just going to double down on that team and kind of consolidate everyone there.
So in a way, it's a bit of a deal breaker.
It was becoming one for us, right?
So it's almost like when you talk to someone and you're not sure if they're giving you a straight answer, you have to ask them the question differently to see if they either contradict themselves or not.
Right.
And that's exhausting. I mean, that's impossible to work with.
It is, and it's, and, you know, I look at it and it's kind of a trade-off of the positives you're getting from the diverse viewpoints and the access to talent in another location, and you know, all the different positives you get, balanced with the additional overhead of communication or understanding or training your managers. And at some point that it's got to be a net positive, right? And in a lot of cases it is, right? And right now in the situation we are, it is a net positive, but it has to remain a net positive. And you know, that depends on your company and your situation. And if it changes, then that's probably time to...
But a net positive, there can be marginally net positive or major net positive.
Right. And you know, you want to aim for majorly net positive, obviously. But yes, once it starts to get back to, okay, is it really worth it? Are there other options?
Yeah. What do you say to CTOs who say, you know, this is all nonsense, it's market driven, hire the best person for the job? Like, you know, you've obviously been intentional about this, and which I find admirable. But I also think, man, you know, does he have like, does he have budget to do this? Like, what do you say to those CTOs?
So I'll take the whole business side of this, and I'll start with a story. So 2016, you know, hiring in Austin, if you've never been there, it's always difficult, right? It's always competitive and challenging. 2016, there was a dearth of capital that came in from large companies, and people were just overpaying. We had one person we recruited that, you know, 2 weeks later got a 40% higher offer, 40%, well above market. And we're like, sorry, we can't do anything about it. So not having access to talent was actually a risk to our business.
Mm.
And so from a business standpoint, I'm starting to think about, do I open another office in another city that's less competitive?
Sheltered from that sort of poaching.
And then, when you look at it that way, building a diverse team, for example, in two different ways gives me access to good talent in a way that's kind of getting around some of that just compete by throwing more cash at the problem.
That's very
right?
interesting.
Because one half is if I go after the engineers that don't necessarily have the same opportunities, the ones that are changing careers, the ones that that are strong, they're really talented people, but need to prove themselves and take a little bit of a risk there, and then build them up. Then I am, then I'm accessing a talent pool that these bigger companies aren't going to. And when I go to Africa, I'm accessing a talent pool that hasn't been tapped yet. That is a little bit like Bangalore was in the late '90s and early 2000s.
I love seeing it as mitigating the risk of poaching.
Yeah, and that's actually I look at it, and every time I think about it, I was like, people say, well, why now that we have some cash, why would we we raised a Series B, why would we not just consolidate here? Then I don't. The market is too competitive and it's too high of a risk to our company.
That's very good. So how do you combat the desire to not be biased in your hiring by being biased in your hiring?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like you need a intentional reverse bias.
Yes.
But no, so one of the ways we try to do it, and it's difficult, but is by expanding the very top of the funnel, and keeping the rest of it, constrained to the same bars, but saying, great, if we're on the fence with giving someone a phone screen, let's give them a phone screen, right? If we're on the fence with bring them in person, let's do that. But then after that point, right, then we need to hold everyone to the same bar. But are there things we can do? One of the things that helped tremendously was when we brought on an in-house recruiter, because then we weren't looking at the resumes first, but she was looking at them and coming from a completely different perspective and could take, the names and some of the other things out of it and do that initial selection, right? And so it was a lot easier for her to not have some of the predefined notions that I might have from looking at, certain languages or,
So I love that idea. I don't think I fully understand it, but you combat the bias by increasing the top of funnel.
Correct.
Which means that you are combating your own sort of bias to like disqualify people early on by having having more people fall through the same process.
Right. We're trying to exactly. We're trying to make the judgment as objective as possible. As objective as you can make an interview, which is by nature very subjective. But we're trying to take as much of that and say, great, let's widen the top, give us access to a wider, broader pool, and then get them to the points that are more objective later.
That's interesting. Do you think that we will be outsourcing to space?
I think space might be outsourcing to us, but I don't know. It's an interesting idea, and actually somewhat tangentially, if you've never read this book by Neil Stephenson called Seven Eves.
I did read it.
Oh, it's one of my favorite books. Phenomenal. But it leads me to think about that and not give it away for the listener, but there's a lot of interesting topics there about outsourcing to space or space outsourcing.
I was actually in my car this morning driving with a friend, and our 6 a.m. conversation was, and we were stuck in pretty bad traffic, and we were exploring, are there other worlds where mathematically there has to be, but where we're stuck in where other beings are stuck in traffic.
Yeah, I think about that all the time. I think about the universe and like why we're here and why we're people, why we're conscious. And I also thought that there was this thing published, I don't know, it might have been 2 or 3 years ago, that was talking about this theory of the big filter. And that, some of the theories around why we haven't found another civilization is either that, we've made it further than a lot of them, or that there's some massive filter event that no civilization has ever lived past, and we are before it. And so something's going to wipe out civilization.
Wow.
And so the reason we haven't found them is because there were some, but they don't exist because the lifespan of a civilization is so small compared to the vastness of the universe.
Like they could have been.
Yep. So anyway, it's something that that I find myself. I watched what movie was? There were 2 space movies that came out. The one with Sandra Bullock and George Clooney.
Mm-hmm. Gravity.
Gravity. And I was fascinated. I went and bought a book on the physics of the movie Gravity by Kip Thorne, I think, and I just read that cover to cover.
So, are you excited about the Elon Musk's mission?
I am. I've always
the colonization of the planets.
I've always wanted to go to space. I wanted to be an astronaut. I watched Space Camp, which was a B movie in the 80s.
Do you feel like today still you want to go to space?
I would love to go to space.
What do you think why do you want to go to, what is it that you think you're going to feel or see? Is it visual? Is it floating? Is it?
I guess there's 2 parts to that. One is just with my own eyes, just seeing the vastness of the universe and just comprehending that or seeing that. And then the other is that I've always been fascinated by flight. People ask me what superpower would I have? I'd fly. I was a massive Superman fan growing up.
Me too.
And so there's a big part of it of just wanting to experience that, feel that flight.
Did you wear the Superman costume underneath your clothes?
Underneath
and went to school.
Ooh, I don't remember, but I certainly wore it for Halloween multiple times.
I went to school doing that.
And it would have been perfect if I wore my Superman t-shirt and just opened it right now. Because I have one.
That would have been classic.
I actually do have one.
Yeah, I when I can't fall asleep, I try to imagine solving the problem of floating.
Mm-hmm.
Like anti-gravitational. I don't think putting on a jetpack is the way to do it. Although it does look like a lot of fun. The newer ones, though.
Yeah, it feels a little bit too forced, a little bit too much power, and there's something about the grace of just like a bird flying.
Goodness. Oftentimes I pick up my children,
mm-hmm.
and then I have them look at their feet, and I say, "Look, you're floating."
Yeah.
And of course, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
But I want them to believe that they can do it. I want the problem solved.
Exactly. That someday somebody's mind is just gonna talk stranger things, and we're just gonna fly.
I love it. Well, Meetesh, I mean, I know we just got started, but we're done.
Oh, well,
Eric is telling us we're done.
Oh, awesome. Well, that means easy.
Thank you very much. Honestly, your thought leadership on diversity, inclusion, the way you just come across and all that is inspirational to me. So thank you.
I appreciate that. I'd love to learn from other people as well. And I'm just doing a little bit of what comes to me.
I love it.
And so hopefully it's helpful.
Okay. Well, we'll see you soon.
Sounds good.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Hi, thank you for listening to the CTO Studio. If you don't mind, take a quick second and please rate and review the show. It helps us a lot. Go to thectostudio.com for more information on what we're doing at 7 CTOs. We also have a video or 2 for you that could be a helpful resource for you as you're managing your company. So thank you for listening.